Hi guys, welcome back. It's Nick here with another episode in our transportation game in Unity 5 series. This time we're going to add some minor tweaks to our procedural height map generator and sort of finish up the work on it. I think so far it's gone quite well. At the end of it I seem to be producing kind of really flat terrain, and I've since discovered it's because I had my my chunk size set too high. I'll talk a bit more on this later because it's something I want to experiment with. But hopefully at the end of the last episode you guys were getting something that looked a bit more like this. So it's a bit more like a mountainous terrain. So you had quite a rocky landscape here, a fair bit of randomness going on, which is great. This is what I was aiming for, it's what I'd achieved in my testing. And the main problem that now faces us is these terrains don't join up. And what I mean by this is you see there's these massive gaping holes in the terrain, whereas these two values should be sort of the same, they're next to each other. Because of the nature of the randomness, they've just gone randomly in a different way. So we're going to fix that this episode, and I'm also going to show you the minor change I just made to get it looking like this. So let's jump straight back into our terrain manager code. So my chunk size is currently 256. Which is what yours should have been. If we scroll down to the set terrain height map, the C values have now changed to be 0.2 rather than 0.5. I just found that worked better for the camera heights. It meant you didn't have to scroll way into space. Again, you can have them sort of whatever you want, but just remember to leave a fair degree of space for your terrain to go wild and random. If you start them off too close to the ground, there's nowhere for the terrain to go, so it's a bit sort of disappointing, but yeah, I mean, it's completely your choice about what kind of landscape you want to make here. Okay, so more onto what we're actually going to get into. The meat here is joining up different elements of terrain, and what my plan is when you generate terrain, if the terrain detects that there's already a terrain generated next to it, it should copy the values of the edge of that terrain into itself as seed values, because then that will influence its own creation and it will ensure that the terrains definitely line up and they won't look weird by joining together. So that's what we're going to attempt to recreate here, and I'm going to do that in the set terrain height map function. First thing we're going to do is add some variables, some boolean variables, to detect whether or not we have a terrain in each direction. So I'm going to be bool left, which equals false, and I'm going to copy that for right, up and down, while to bottom and top, seeing as that's my naming convention so far. Okay, so we start off with the left hand side. So what we're going to do is we'll create a float, a 2D float, and we'll call it HM for height map. This can be the height map of the left hand terrain. And I'm going to use the get terrain height map function and pass it a new vector2, which is going to be our coordinate index dot x minus 1, so 1 to the left, with the same y value. So this is going to get the height map of the terrain that's on the left. And what we want to say is if the height map is not equal to null, so if we've managed to find a height map, then we know that terrain is loaded. So we'll set left equal to true, and now all we have to do is copy the values there into our own heights. So we'll add a for loop for int I equals 0. I is less than, in this case we want it to be hm.getLength as 0, I++, and what we want to do is set the left hand edge of our terrain equal to the right hand edge of their terrain. So we want to say heights at it's I, 0 for the left hand edge is equal to hm at I, hm.getLength 1 minus 1. So that should copy across all the values from the other terrain into our. You may remember that our getTerrainHeightMap function isn't complete, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But first of all, let's copy this through for the other parts, so the left, right, top and bottom sides of our terrain. So I'll copy these values. So this is for the right hand side, so it's going to be coordinate index x plus 1, and instead of going to be I and 0, it's going to be the left hand side of the other terrain and the right hand side of our terrain. So we'll do heights dot get length 1 minus 1. And now for the top values. So the x coordinate will stay the same, the y coordinate will be plus 1, and we're going to change the length value we're interested in to 1. They should be the same, but just in case we'll keep that as 1. And we're going to change that to 0, I, because we're now interested in the other axis. And same over here, this is going to be heights.getLength 0 minus 1, I. So copying their bottom line into our top line. And actually I've realised that we didn't change the Boolean variable we're setting here. So we'll say right is true, top is true, and finally for the bottom value. So change that to minus 1, and then this now becomes 0, and this now becomes length minus 1. We'll change the variable to bottom. Now these corner values, oops, that should be heights, not heights. These corner values should only be set if they're not already set by the edge values. So for the top left corner, if top or left, sorry, that should be if not top and not left, we need to give that a seed, otherwise it's already seeded by the other terrain. And we need to do that for the other values here. So this is the top, that's actually the bottom left, because this should be width and height are swapped on this. So I'm just going to change that here. The height value comes first in a terrains array. Made a mistake there. So this is actually the bottom value. So if we say if not left and not bottom, we'll set that. And if here this is the top right, so we want to do if not top and not right. And finally this is the bottom right, so we say if not bottom and not right. This just ensures we don't overwrite something that's already written by another terrain. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, our getTerrainHeightMap function is not functional. So we'll scroll down to here, it just returns null at the moment. Now there's a couple of things that might happen. The first thing is our terrain might already be visible, in which case we can just select that terrain and send the height map over. Otherwise we might need to load from memory the height map, otherwise the terrain is not generated. So those are our three cases. So the first thing I want to do with this function is check to see if our terrain is generated. So I'm going to go if loaded chunks dot contains, and then I'm going to put in coordinate index, then great, our terrain is loaded, at least it had the values generated. Otherwise we're just going to return null because the terrain doesn't exist, so there's nothing to send back. Okay, so now we've only got two things to think about: if the terrain is visible or if it isn't visible. I'm going to add a for loop for int I equals 0 as our loop counter. I is less than visible chunks dot length I plus plus. And what we want to do is say if visible chunks dot x, sorry, visible chunks at I dot x is equal to, also, yeah, visible chunks dot I, visible chunks at the I index dot x is equal to coordinate index x value, and the y value is the same. So we'll just copy this code. And that should be a double equals actually. There we go. Then the chunk is visible. So all we have to do is return, and then we'll do chunk graphics at I dot train data dot get heights. And there's no maximum value, so it's just going to be chunk graphics at I train data dot height map width. And the same for height. So this is just going to get all of the height maps, all of the height data for that terrain, which probably isn't efficient if you're only interested in one side, but this is a very general function. So now we've dealt with terrain visible. The last thing we need to do is, if this isn't found, as in if we get to the end of this loop and the terrain isn't visible, we need to load from memory. So otherwise I'm going to do a return. I'm going to make a new function called load height map from memory, and it's going to take a vector2 coordinate index. I'm just going to add that function down here. I'll close up diamond square, and just above save chunks from memory I'm going to do float, two-dimensional float returns. I'll copy this function name, load height map from memory. We'll fill this in later when we actually have time. Vector2 coordinate index. You see our code is really beginning to get a proper theme to it now. So there's consistency in the way we're naming variables and the way we're using variables in certain ways. That shouldn't have a vector2. Okay, so that's our get terrain height map function. So hopefully now we should be able to see that our terrain is all joined up. Give this a play. Null reference exception. You can always guarantee having a null reference exception. And I think I know why this is. Okay, when we generate our chunks, let's just close up a few of these functions. We'll go back to the on-camera move function. It's been a while since we've looked in there. When we generate these chunks, which is down here, load chunk from memory, visible chunks isn't correct. So we actually want to change these so they're above when the load chunk from memory is called. So we need to modify this a bit. We need to change first of all this to be visible chunks. And the other thing is, new chunk graphics isn't set here. So what we need to do is have a separate loop which assigns the new chunk graphics, and then another loop after that which loops through and generates the chunks, because by this point chunk graphics and visible chunks are back to their original values, which is why we're getting these problems. We just had to modify this to also take a loading index here rather than a free terrains, because we've already updated the variables, so we need to use a different index to access the correct terrain here. Hopefully that should not affect our system too drastically. It should all run correctly. So we'll just hit play. Okay, all of our chunks are generating, and I think you can immediately see, oh, some of them aren't joined up. So it seems we've got the this left to right motion, because these two trains are right next to each other. I know it can be difficult to see with the lighting, but they are clearly joined up. You can see a bit of a seam, but apart from that, they are very well joined. But the left and right aren't correct. I think the problem is we've actually got them the wrong way around. I'll just close up this on-camera move function. If we go back to set terrain height map, that's not the set terrain, the right one we're looking for. This one here, set terrain height map. I think this should be the other way around. This should be the far side, so it's going to be height dot get length 0 minus 1, and this should be the close side, so this should actually be 0. It's a mistake I have made, so we also need to do that for the bottom. So in this case, you are 0 and you are value of not 1 here, it's hm.getLength there, and that should make it all join up. I'll give that a play. Okay, that is preposterously, that has completely destroyed it. One or more corner value is not set. We're going to have to take a look at this function. Okay, so what I didn't realise is in my convention the top value is actually less in y coordinates than the bottom value is actually more in y coordinates. So I'll just undo my fix here I worked out. So we were stuck with this code here, and if we changed it, it didn't work. Like if we changed these coordinates around, all we have to do is change the top to represent negative on the y and the bottom to represent positive on the y. That will recompile, and you see right here that we now have a beautiful field of terrain, quite a rocky landscape, but it is all joined up beautifully the exact way we want it to. So I know this has been quite a long one, but I think we've done quite a lot here. So my name's Pearson, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.